All right, so we focus on mostly on the top part of this diagram, on plumbing together and connecting together the flow of events from the component, dispatch to a centralized dispatcher that made the actions flow down to the reducer. Right now, the reducer is not doing anything; it's just doing an alert, just to make sure that the plumbing was correct. But let's focus now on the reducer actually generating new states, right? Putting it in the store, and that store, extracting some of that state from the store, mapping it to properties in the component. Remember, the components; these are all stateless components now, right? They need to be told what is it that it needs to render, right? It's not maintaining any of these states, so we have to grab information from the central state, right, and map it to some properties into the component, right? So let's do that next. Okay, so let's go back to our components, right? Our component only had the dispatch, yes? It was only dispatching the events. Now it has to be able to receive something back, right? It needs to be told, hey, render this, whatever that is, okay? So let's declare some property. Let's declare some component property. So let's go back to our component. This is our component. And let's declare now some property there, some component property. There it is. All right, so now we have, as arguments, we have these two things. We have the component property, and we have dispatch. And we want to render the component property somewhere. Maybe down here, down below here, we can say, we can render it what is this, H2, we'll do an H3, and we'll render some component property. Yes? We'll render that in there. Okay? All right, excellent. So it's expecting that. So how do we feed it here? Presumably, it'll be from some state that the reducer generated. Yes? We need to have the reducer generate the state, and then we need to pump that new state to this property. So how do we do that? All right, so let's see. So in the reducer, what we're going to do is that I believe we had already generated an initial state. We had generated an initial state. I'm going to copy right from the example, so I don't screw up here. So here's the reducer. Here's the state. And here's the action. I'm going to give myself a little bit of space here. So the state is going to be some property. So I'm just going to copy straight from the slides. So some default property has some state information. Yes. So that's the initial state of the application, right? When it gets instantiated. And what we're going to do is that these case statements, the way that new states are generated, it's whatever the reducer returns. To generate new states, the reducer just returns something, right? Returns a new state. And whatever the reducer returns will be the new state that gets inserted into the store. All right? So for instance, we might say that if it's action 1, we might return a new state that will be, for instance, this one right here, will return some state attribute, whatever that is, okay, that has some new state. Right? So this might be some state attribute, some new state, say 1. Or if I click on the other action, this might be some new state 2. Yes? Make sense? All right. Let's remove the alerts. We know we're getting there. And the new state, right, if the action is number 1, this object will be the brand new state, the brand new current state. The old state will still be there, right? It just won't be the current state, right? And the store keeps track of the history of all the states. So we could potentially, backtrack to a previous state and put the application in any state previously. right? Back, forwards and backwards. If we click on action 2, this will be the new current state. Everybody okay? All right. All right. So we know the reducer is generating new states now, right? Typically what we do is that if we would have a catch-all, if it was none of the previous states, I'm just going to keep the current state. Right? I'm just going to keep the current state. I'm going to say just return the current state. Okay? Yes? I'm just going to keep the state the way it was. Right? It just stays the same. All right, excellent. So, all right. So to be able to feed the state to a component, right, we need to create what are called mappers, right? Mapping functions that will say, okay, so you want to feed the state to the component. Well, you'll need to create a mapping and say, I'm going to take this little sub piece of the state, right, and I'm going to map it to a property, right, that the component is expecting, right? The component is expecting. What is it expecting? It's expecting a property called some component property. That's what it's expecting. It's expecting, well, also the dispatch. But the dispatch is being passed by the connect, right? The connect is passing the dispatch. So it's not my responsibility to do the dispatch, right? But it is my responsibility to map, to extract something from the state, right, and map it to the some component property. Right? So how do we do that? So to do that, we're going to use what is called a mapping function, right? A mapping function. This is a function. It's called with a very generic name that says some state to property mapper, right? It maps state to properties, component properties, right? And whatever it returns will be what will be fed to the component, right? Right now it's trivial. It's just a JSON object, right? That maps, that says I'm going to pass to the component. It's expecting this attribute, right? This property. I'm going to make it the value of that property will be the state's some state attribute, which isn't that what the state that the reducer generated? That is the state that the reducer generated, right? So I'm going to grab that value and I'm going to pass it to the some component property. So this is the mapping. Now this mapping here is trivial. It's just a one-to-one. But it could be complex, right? This could be that the reducer is generating a very complex state, yes, of which we only want to render a very little tiny piece, right? Or in the state, it might be a long array, but when we want to render it, probably we want to concatenate those array into one single string, perhaps, yes? So this mapper would be responsible for the transformation, yes, of the state that is being kept with whatever the component is actually expecting. Yes? All right, so this is where the transformation would happen. The transformation of the state into whatever the component might expect. Right now it's trivial. It's just a one-to-one mapping. So let's copy that. So here's our container. Right, so I'm going to put it right under our component. There it is, our mapper. Right? Okay, so that mapper is, notice that it takes as argument the state, the current state. Right? So it receives the current state, and is going to extract from that state some state attribute, which is right here, that's being generated by the reducer. The reducer is generating these states. See that? So what it's going to do is just going to extract from there, and it's going to feed it into a. It's going to just generate. This is just a mapping, right? It's a mapping function, right? And then we can feed that. We can then do the connection. In the connect is where the magic happens, right? The connect says I'm going to use that function. If the state changes, I will pass the state to the mapping function. The mapping will extract whatever I need, and then I will pass it to my component. Right? Whatever the result, whatever I return, that's I'm going to pass to the component. the component is going to extract the sum component property. There it is. That's what this curly bracket says. The curly bracket says, I think I'm missing a curly. Okay, it's extracting that property from that object, and that's what eventually gets rendered right here. Okay. All right. Let's try it out. That's it. Let's try it out. Let's see if this exploded. Some action. Notice that it generates some new state 1 or some new state 2. Okay, we've completed the loop. We completed the connection. We went, dispatched the reducer generating new state. We extracted that new state and we mapped it to the component property. Yes? That's all there is. Right? This is all there is to Redux conceptually. Yes?
So if we're passing more than one property into the component,
yep.
Do we store that as an object which contains the dictionary? Or?
Yeah, that dictionary could be as complex as you want.
Yeah, so how would you, if we go back to the code, right, if we have the, whatever, state props member.
Yeah, you can create more things, right?
Extra thing.
Yeah, and you can say state dot whatever.
Yeah, how would you access that in the component?
All these would be part of these, and.
Is there a way to turn it instead into like a property?
Oh, it could be a whole object. Yeah, it could be an entire object. It doesn't have to be over here. It's just these are strings, but they could be objects that contain arrays that contain objects that contain arrays. It could be a fairly complex object.
So would that be better practice?
Oh yeah, sure, definitely. Yes.
Then just retrieve the attribute.
Yeah, definitely. Yep. Yeah. So that's all there is to it conceptually. Right? Conceptually, that's all. Yes. Go ahead. Well, not per component. A logic unit. So you might have multiple components that handle courses, right? So you have typically a reducer that only handles courses, and then same for modules, for lessons, topics, and whatnot.
Is there any case where like one reducer connects to some
So the reducers are namespaced, right? So you have really one big store, right? Of which then it contains multiple reducers. You can navigate any which way you want. Yeah. Yes.
in terms of modularization.
Yeah.
So would you code all these things into one file?
Oh no, not at all. Not at all. So that's it. That's all there is to Redux. Wait, there's a bit more. So the rest of everything else is how do you break this up, right, into best practices, right? Yes, there is an organizational of how you put things in different places, what files and what standards and conventions, and that's what we're going to take a look at next. Okay. But as a concept, that's all there is to Redux. Everything else is, well, how do I scale this? How do I scale this for a real application? So let's take a look at some of those next.